Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. My name is Nick Hudson. I'm sitting across from Thos, which is one of my favourite things to do because we so rarely get to do it nowadays.
However, thank you, Nick, by the way. It's very kind of you to say so. Well, you say across, but obviously I'm thinking in more chess terms. So
yes.
I was going to use a knight's move. I was going to go two forward and one sideways.
I'm a diagonally across from you.
Oh, you're a bishop man, are you?
Sometimes. Welcome, Thos.
You can't beat it, I'm
We
told.
have made it past the threshold of 900 episodes, so thank you for your fascinating facts about how... a milestone Musical Talk has made. We are the longest running independent podcast in the country.
And we're also the longest running show business podcast in the United Kingdom, yes.
Which is amazing. So one of the greatest things about Musical Talk is if you go back and listen to old episodes is how things have changed. And you've proposed a rather interesting topic, haven't you, Thos?
Well, it's not for me to say whether it's interesting, but we'll present it before us and see what people think. Yeah. There have been episodes over the years, and I remember one that you and I recorded a long time ago, where we simply said, what was the last original cast recording that you'd listened to? And that was probably getting on for 15 years ago, that episode, or something like that. Certainly from a more artifact age, a pre-digital age, which is, and when I say pre-digital, of course, the internet was around and things like that, but CDs were still very much more a part of a thing in people's lives. Certainly in mine, I'm not an early adopter. But I thought we could sort of revisit it in a sideways way this year, and sideways, obviously, that or forwards, like a rook. And that would be, well, I had an experience, I suppose, and it's been making me think. And that experience is that in the last few weeks and months, I had a catastrophic computer failure. I'm very sad to say. It's all fixed now. It was an electrical spike up my motherboard, if you really want to know. And there's a euphemism waiting to happen. The situation was I was left without access to digital music for more time than I would have liked whilst I was sorting myself out electronically. And I thought, well, I'm a man who likes music. I like a lot of music, not just musical theatre, but obviously musical theatre is a very important part of that. So I still have a CD player somewhere in the house, so I turned that on, I fired it up, put the gas in. You
have your grime music that you listen to, and you have heavy metal.
I don't, but there's plenty of grime in the room in which I listen to music, and I'm sure that's very similar. So I turned on I got my CD machine working very easily. I just switched it on. I just don't use it very often. And I thought, well, my CDs are actually mostly in the loft now because most of my music's digital. So I clambered into the loft, which is as exciting as you think it's going to be. But of course, what you don't want to do is bring down boxes and boxes and boxes. So you make a selection. And this is the thing that's been getting me thinking. I went up there and I sort of looked in the dark at what I had. And I realised that I was going to bring down 3 different kinds of CD collections, small CD collections. One was a series of CDs recording the big band sound of the 1930s in the United Kingdom, what we call the hotel band sound. And if you know what I'm talking about, which I'm guessing you
all
won't.
The kids love it, Thos.
Absolutely. Are you telling me that Morris Winnick is no longer a household name? My favourite one is Carol Gibbons. Great name, crazy guy. Carol Gibbons and the Savoy Orpheans, or it was also a much more innocent time. His smaller, more commercial band was called Carol Gibbons and His Boyfriends. Carol being a gentleman, by the way, with 2 L's, an American gentleman who settled in the United Kingdom and made an enormous success of being a band leader in this country. Because he was at the Savoy, because they were all based around hotels, the British bands, he was at the Savoy at the time that the BBC started, or very early on. So he was actually the second band leader. I'm getting quite detailed already. He was the second band leader for the Savoy Orpheans, the first being De Broy Summers. And because they were just down the road from Savoy Hill, which is where the BBC started, before it moved to Portland Place, where it currently is for its radio services, they were always being used for live music on the radio. So they just, by dint of proximity and geography, had very high profile on the BBC. And of course, on this newfangled wireless system, it made them household names. So lots of recordings by a company called Vocalion of Carol Gibbons and Ray Noble and Morris Winnick and Lou Prager and people like that of the period.
My first question for you is, are these songs that you had on your computer anyway?
Yes.
And did you put them there via ripping the CDs, or are they available for streaming purposes for everyone? Because I find the one reason I miss having a CD player is obscure music exists generally either on YouTube or on a CD, and you can't really get it on sort of Apple Music or Spotify.
Well, I certainly agree with that. It's one of the reasons I no longer use iTunes, because music sometimes turns up on iTunes and then disappears again, including some of the weirder stuff. I'll answer your question sideways by saying I agree with you. My ability to find obscure songs, which you'll gather immediately is somewhere around the era I like, the kind of thing I like to do, you can't rely on mainstream digital services. You have to buy collector's editions of this, that, and the other. This is a sidestep, but not too far away. I'm a great fan of the music of Jack Buchanan, and I've recently been researching for Musical Talk, a future episode coming up probably quite a long way away because there's a lot of research to be done. One of his shows called Stand Up and Sing. It's a 1931 musical with Jack Buchanan, who was Britain's Fred Astaire. He was the biggest name in musical theatre in the country in the 1930s and 20s, not in that order. And he, like a lot of people, recorded songs on 78 from the big shows. Stand Up and Sing was an enormous hit in 1931. It's completely forgotten today, to the point where it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. It only has a sub. It's included on the list of Jack Buchanan shows, but it's not there. I am planning to write that page, and I'm going to do a lot of research, and I'm going to bring some of that to Musical Talk. But if you want to hear the songs, you can only find it on really obscure CDs of Jack Buchanan music, which has mostly been collated by collectors. So, obscure, I think is the word. So, yes, I agree with you. If you want to hear obscure music, you can't rely on digital sources.
Yeah.
Conversely, there are things on digital which you simply can't find on CD. So actually, you do need a mix of the two. And in a way, that's what this episode is going to be about. So I've said quite a lot immediately about one of the kinds of music I was listening to, 1930s British hotel big bands. But the great thing about that, of course, is they are playing the contemporary hits of the 1920s and 30s. And those contemporary hits of the 1920s and 30s are by Irving Berlin, George Gershwin, Rodgers and Hart, Jerome Kern, Hoagy Carmichael, you name them, they're there. So in a way, they're marvellous records. Not just that, they play Tin Pan Alley, which is wider than the field of musical theatre, although often written by similar people. But there's a lot of musical theatre from the 20s and 30s in there. So you'll be listening to an album and suddenly a song will come up which you've heard in original cast recordings and revivals from the last few years. I've got 2 or 3 modern revivals of Lady Be Good, and there you stick in a Ray Noble album from 1935, and it's got a cover of Lady Be Good, the opening number, or any of the songs from it. So that's one of the areas of musical theatre I pulled from my loft so I could listen to it on my CD player.
Do you have vinyl? And because that's very popular now, it's it's that thing that technology does where people you've always done it yourself, but more people are using digital cameras now because it's seen as the retro thing to do.
Have I become fashionable?
You
again?
have. Congratulations. But it's
me and my Nokia phone as well. I know that became fashionable a few years ago by accident.
But now vinyl is huge. The Wicked album is going to be on vinyl and
it is. Do you know what's very interesting? I think it's a cultural thing, certainly from the era from which I was being raised. So I was a boy in the 70s and 80s, and I really got into music in the 80s. The
1970s and 80s.
Thank you for clarifying. That is entirely right, yes. Good point, yes, right. Yeah. And my family, we weren't a record player family, so we didn't use vinyl or records. My father, very early on, had been...
Wax cylinders.
No, but my father was he was an early adopter of cassette technology. He'd had a reel-to-reel for his 21st birthday many years ago, and he's a son of the war, so you can work that out. But he loved cassettes, as we recognise them, micro cassettes, the ones that look just a little bit larger than a credit card, that kind of thing. And so my family always had cassettes. So we bought things on cassette, and we didn't buy things on records. And I've never really got into records. I have a record collection and I have a record player to play my record collection on, but I do not play my records on my record player. I do have, and this is also a story for another day, a large collection of industrial musicals, which we've touched on before, all on vinyl because that's how they come. And one of my plans is to sit down and listen to them and then review them for Musical Talk at some stage. So I have a vinyl collection. But I'm going to throw a couple of interesting things in, and I'm fully aware we're still only on cohort 1 of what I've pulled from the loft. Are you aware, and I find this amazing, that you were talking about the retro love for vinyl, and vinyl does give a particular sound. It's not just nostalgia. Actually, it is a very hands-on, it's a very
tactile. Yeah.
Very good word. I agree with you. I fully understand why people like vinyl and records. Fully understand that. And I did work for a hospital radio station many years ago, and obviously we use records there rather than cassettes because the sound quality is better, less hiss. But can you believe it? It's not in any way the same form or size in its reappreciation, but people are turning back to cassettes. I think it might have something to do with mixtapes.
Okay.
I think people want the actual artifact of giving somebody a mixtape rather than a digital medley. But it's not enormous, but there is a little bit of an uptick, as they say in the industry, in relation to cassettes. And even more excitingly, and I've mentioned it already, my father, as I say, had a reel-to-reel given to him, a Philips 4-track, given to him for his 21st birthday, which still works. It's valve technology, literally valve technology. It takes a while to warm up, but it's a wonderful thing, still operates. And those cassettes, the reels, because they're bigger tape, degrade much slower. And so actually it was really good quality on those. Believe it or not, the reel-to-reel industry is also picking up. Now, this is strange because music isn't released on reel-to-reel. There was no real phase for that. It must be for It must be for recordings people have made from the radio in the 50s, 60s, 70s and 80s, which is really the big reel-to-reel period. Once again, we had reel-to-reels in the hospital radio studio I used in the 1980s. So I'm used to the technology, and I quite like it as it happens. So I can understand why people want to do it. Here's the thing. Germany, for some reason, is now the centre of reel-to-reel tape machinery. Yeah. You can now buy either refurbished reel-to-reel machines, or you can buy a new one. They are exorbitantly expensive. They're anything from £5,000 to £10,000. So you've really got to be in love with it. But here's the thing: there are sufficient numbers of people who are in love with it to make that worthwhile commercially.
When does yours arrive?
You make a joke. But I do own a collection of reel-to-reels, which I would very much like to be able to play because I can't at the moment. So, yes, at some stage I shall be buying a shiny German reel-to-reel machine, and I will put my reel-to-reels on and I will listen to whatever's on them because now I've got no memory at all.
And that's the kind of exciting thing about recovering your physical media because you don't know what's on it. If it's just a blank tape or a blank disc, you're like, I'm going to look at this because I don't know what songs are on it. And I miss the kind of exciting feeling you get getting a CD and reading the liner notes and looking at the lyrics or looking at the pictures of the show in the book and
it's more than just the songs, isn't it? Yes.
And we have missed that. And I know that Apple tried to do kind of digital album artwork on the screen, but it doesn't have the same tactile.
No. I've got a slight glitch, or I have had a slight glitch on that machine that failed. My Windows Media Player seemed to pick random images from my collection. So you'd be listening to an album, let's call it the incidental music of Laurel and Hardy films or something like that, which have been covered by various people, including Ronnie Hazelhurst, the great BBC composer, and the Bo Hunks, a Dutch group who play woodwind and brass instruments and who are fabulous. So lots of different people doing the same thing. So something as bland as that, well, not as bland, but something as esoteric.
Obscure.
Esoteric, quite right. For some reason or other, my media player would maybe pull up a picture of Patrick Macnee as John Steed, or it would be random.
Yeah.
I don't quite know why, but there we are. Yes, it is a shame, actually, but this is one of the downsides of the digital world, that you're right, you don't have the equivalent of a program.
Hannah and I were looking at pictures of my old house, and there was a shelf with CDs on it. She said, I want to see what CDs you had. It was like going through, that's, and you can't judge people anymore by walking into their room, can you?
I agree with that. The good old days, you looked at books, then you looked at DVDs, and you looked at CDs. But they're all ways of identifying somebody's character, actually.
You remember my old room, don't you?
I do indeed, yes. I rather remember your old collection.
Yes.
It is interesting. Having these tangible artifacts is fabulous and has been a real insight to me. But we've only really covered the 1930s bands. The other big era, and funnily enough, this ties in with our conversation about cassettes, because I have a selection of CDs called The Capital Years, and each CD is an anthology of high quality recordings by Capitol Music and Capitol, that's the name of the company, I think, who, Nat King Cole, Peggy Lee, great names on there. High quality, hi-fi from the 50s and 60s in particular. And each of these albums is an anthology of a famous composer or lyricist or both from the glory days of musical theatre writing. So, back again, Irving Berlin, Rodgers and Hart, Rodgers and Hammerstein, which I did force myself to buy, George Gershwin, of course, Hoagie Carmichael, Jimmy McHugh, Harry Warren. So they're not all the ones that are absolutely top of the list, although their music's fabulous. They're not the ones, if I said, I think there's about 20 in the collection, you'd have to say, well, where are we? Who's number 15? Sammy Cahn, one of the great lyricists, more 50s than he is 30s. But there's some
Christmas songs, isn't he?
Not just Christmas songs, but he has written Christmas songs and made a lot of money from it, as anyone who writes a good Christmas song does. Prompting the late Tom Lehrer, as I'm sure you're aware, he made the observation that there are a hell of a lot of songs about Christmas which just rake in the money. So he wrote his famous song, A Late Flowering Corn, I'm Spending Hanukkah in Santa Monica. Do you know that one?
No.
Yes.
But I do enjoy Tom Lehrer.
It's his riposte to the world of Christmas music. So these Capitol Sings anthologies of the great songwriters, particularly from the period I love the best. And these songwriters nearly all wrote either musical films or musical shows, and in many cases, both.
Did you find songs that you'd forgotten about?
Yes. And that's what's really interesting. And also you think, I hadn't realised that song, which I know intimately, was written by Frank Lesser. Yeah. Or that happened, literally, the last one I was listening to was Frank Lesser. That was yesterday. And there was a song on it. And I just thought, I had no idea he wrote that. I knew the song backwards. Well, I even knew it forwards, which is probably better. And certainly show the CD was playing
diagonally as well.
But, it was a real insight to me that of the overlap between the Great American Songbook and the Great American Musical Theatre Songbook and the quality that was being produced in what, let's call it, the pre-Sondheim era, using a different form. They aren't nitty-gritty rhymes like Sondheim. They're much more traditional songs, but my goodness, they hit home. And they run from about, these composers were writing really good quality songs from about 1920 to about 1960. And that's the range more or less covered. I have a particular taste for the 20s and 30s, but a really good song from the 50s, absolutely. And indeed, on the Frank Lesser one, there was I Believe in You, which is from How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, which is 1961, I think. So, it's into the 60s. But these fabulous songs sung by the top-notch singers of the period, you can't beat Peggy Lee or people like that. Terrific stuff. So I've been particularly excited by that. And fun enough, I've listened to them in chunks. So in the sense that I listened to a lot of the British big band stuff. Then I've started listening to these anthologies. I brought them all down at the same time. And that has been particularly joyful, exactly for the reason you said. It sort of reminded me of songs that they'd written and shows for which they'd written, which had either escaped me or just weren't at the top of my memory as I was doing it. It brought me great joy. That's the real thing. If I'm enjoying the music or singing along, because I live on my own and I can do these things, there's the neighbours don't bash the ceiling with a broomstick, so I'm fine. The bringing of joy through music is the reason I'm a musical presenter here on a podcast presenter here on Musical Talk, that I've loved
and
music.
A musical presenter on Pod Talk.
Pod Talk.
The War of the Worlds.
I think you can drop the P from that. I think Odd Talk might be slightly better. And then, of course, and this interestingly was by far the smallest of the three in my things I brought down. So this is cohort 3. So we've had musical big bands which are essentially actively but accidentally anthologies of music from the 20s and 30s, much of which is from musical
pop music of the time.
Pop music of the time. The Capitol Sings, which are retrospective collections from, because they were published in the 90s. Oh, I haven't told the story about the cassettes. When they first started coming out, I was one of those people that the people behind Virgin Records and HMV and Tower Records, the 3 big shops in the centre of London that you went to buy CDs.
Very exciting, wasn't it?
Oh, it was marvellous. And I was one of those people that the director said have now disappeared, that after work, if I was bored, I would take a bus to Oxford Street from where I was working and I would wander around HMV or whichever and spend 50 quid on CDs.
Every Saturday, my friend Edward and I would go to MVC, which was a shop here in Chiswick, the Music and Video Club, and it was a huge shop. And I would clean the house, or I'd get pocket money or whatever, and I just £10.
You'd spend your ill-gotten gains on a...
And I used to get... I wasn't hugely interested in albums. I was more interested in compilations, because I think it gave me a much bigger musical, like the best 60s albums and the best 70s. So I get...
These were your formative purchases, weren't they? Yeah.
So I was very excited every time a new one came out. But for pop music, I would get the Now albums.
I remember those, yes.
And now we have Now, that's what I call a musical. So it's kind of...
But of those early things that you bought in MVC, did you remember buying in your formative years, buying anything musical theatre? Or were you at that stage still exploring pop from which to launch into musical theatre?
There was a time when I was little, I too wanted to be a radio presenter, and I was fascinated by radio jingles. And I've talked about this story with Mike Dixon on the podcast. And I'd seen Grease in town, and there was...
That's the name of the sequel, isn't it?
Grease 2. Yeah. There was an album of the cast recording of that production of Grease that came out, and it had a radio jingle in it.
Oh, so as in part of the score?
Yeah, in part of the score, and it's on the CD. And I was listening to it, and I opened the leaflet thing, whatever they were called, the liner, I guess, and it said written and performed by Michael Dixon. And there's the story that he tells about is they needed a jingle because the radio would play before the show. So Mike went into his little makeshift studio and recorded a 6-vocal track, and that's it. And it's on the CD. So it's kind of things...
Is this the CD of the film score or the musical score?
It's yes. So it's like a Frankenstein monster version. Yeah. It's got the John Farrar songs written for Olivia Newton-John, and it's got some of the original songs from the stage show, but not to be so obscure as to have like All Choked Up and the Alma Mater parody and all that kind of stuff. But it's
like when you buy a Hair album, there's any collection of songs you can have in it, because it's that's interesting.
Anyway, but yes, CD, that was going into a shop and talking, because I remember speaking to the person. This is old man podcast now, but
it is today. Yes,
I love that song.
But I think after 900 episodes, we can allow ourselves a little bit of a look back.
Just say, do you have any things with radio jingles on them? And he went, no. And I said, well, I'll listen to this one. And you could hand the CD to someone, and they say you can listen to it on post 9 or something.
Booth 3, yeah. But I mean, my parents remember doing that in the 50s and 60s. You see it in films, in fact. Funnily enough, I can go one step further. It's the same thing. When I said that after work I would go down to HMV or whichever and spend 50 quid on CDs. But originally, in my formative years in the 80s, I'd go up to town and I would buy cassettes. Now, actually, as it happens, these Capital Years cassettes, these anthologies I was talking about of the top-notch recordings by Peggy Lee and everyone, of the great songwriters' collections, first came out as cassettes. And I started collecting them on cassette. And funny enough, it was exactly that time that so this must have been in the 90s, I moved to, maybe even late 80s, can't remember, but whenever it was, people were moving from cassette decks to CD players, I was halfway through collecting those on cassette. And then I transferred and bought the rest of them as they came out, the slightly more obscure names, or seemingly obscure names, on CD. And then I had to retrofill back to the CDs, which actually I did over a course of many years. I sort of bought them on eBay or something like that. And here's the interesting thing. They got beautiful caricatures of the songwriters that they are showcasing. And on the cassette, a cassette is quite small compared to a CD. Certainly the case. And so I'd always liked these little cassettes because they had these nice pictures on the front. But when I got the CDs, I thought, these are so good, I'd like to display them. I didn't in the end, but, they're the kind of thing that actually would look great together, sort of an anthology of pictures of the great songwriters. Anyway, we digress. For me, it marks that point in my life when I moved from cassette to CD. And then the final cohort, the last of the 3 kinds of thing I bought down from the loft, interestingly, was the smallest by a long shot. It was actually original cast recordings. Because I'd actually bought down 30 CDs, that was probably enough. Although it is interesting, although I'm now back up and all my digital stuff is working again, I'm still going through the CDs because I'm still enjoying them so much, even though I've probably got them digitally. Certainly all the contents. The handful of score original cast recordings I bought down include, and there weren't many more than this, Fine and Dandy, which is a recreation of a 1930s show by Kay Swift, who was the person who never quite married George Gershwin, but wrote more like George Gershwin than anyone who wasn't George Gershwin did. So if you want to hear a lost George Gershwin musical, Fine and Dandy is the one to go for. It's a beautiful recording. And Snakes, the musical, which was an Edinburgh show I saw and was terrific, probably about 2013-14. And
the people hiss in the audience, they didn't like it.
Very good. You speak with forked tongue, I'm told.
Yes.
But and those, funny enough, were the two. Only brought down two scores that I can remember, two original cast recordings. One Edinburgh cast recording, which is a rare thing anyway. They don't always have an album, but this one did, and it was terrific. And this revival recording of a Gershwin style. And they've been bringing me a great deal of pleasure as well. But it's got me thinking, which is what we've been talking about, that, actually, I have moved on with the times. I like everything digitally. It's easier to listen. You can put it on you can listen to it on people listen to it on their mobile telephones, but you can still have a MP3 player if you want, or an iPod. You play it on your computer, you can play it on your television. Anything's got a speaker can more or less be connected up in some way.
And also,
to
as
play your digital music.
We'll talk about this in a future episode, but as a music creator, it's much easier to get your music out there.
That's you speaking,
now,
isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, for people to listen to whatever they want, because you don't need to go through the process of printing a CD. You just distribute it online.
And people can find it. And that's how I think we'll need to finish this conversation. But for me, much as I love the digital music, it turns out I still love the artifacts. And what it's made me think I need to do is, because I'm not proposing to put these CDs back in the loft.
Put every episode of Musical Talk onto a CD.
CD, yes. Gosh, what a lot of CDs that would take. But I do think that I will keep at least a handful of CDs physically in my collection, i.e. not in the loft, i.e. ready to play, because it has actually reminded me how much I enjoy it and how it's made me listen to the music in a slightly different way. I think because I had to physically put it into a machine, pick a button, it's different from just selecting something on your computer, which is so quick and easy. It can sort of become background music. Whereas actually, I found I'm listening to the songs much more clearly again.
And also the modern youth of today, they like...
the modern youth of today?
They like these newfangled playlists.
I've read of this,
So there's no... With a CD, you have, this is what they want the album to sound like.
It's curated, in fact.
Whereas nowadays, it's just this song, this song, this song, with no...
Constantly on shuffle.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I mean, that's a very interesting point. Yes, because I would not listen to an original cast recording on shuffle, but funny enough, I wouldn't listen to any of these anthologies on shuffle. Even, I mean, we'll make any difference, but say, on an anthology album. But you're right, it's been put in an order, presumably, in order to give you a profile as you listen, an upbeat song, a lesser song, or whatever it is. Also, you don't want to put all the bangers at the beginning. You want a mix of, that one's a little bit more obscure, or I didn't know he wrote that, or she wrote this.
Congratulations on using the word banger, Thos.
Thank you very much indeed. I know my sick beats.
Yes.
And yet, and here's the flip side. My father, bless him, who's 85, as I say, he's a son of the war, who... was the one who loved cassettes in our family and set us all on our way, and is a great influence on me in terms of music, although, funnily enough, his taste in music is rather more, speech marks, modern than mine, because he's a great fan of the 50s and 60s in pop, which is not really my idiom at all. But he had a broad world view in terms of musicals. He loves My Fair Lady and Gigi, and it's not just Lerner and Lowe for him, by the way, but, he was a great influence and still is. But he loves YouTube. And this is how he, at 85, is discovering new music. First of all, I'm so proud of my father for still wanting to find new music, not just listen to what he knows and informs that he knows it. So he occasionally does what I think we all do, actually, but he calls it following his nose. So he'll go to a piece of music that he's seen before or heard before that he likes, and the algorithm can sometimes take him in a different direction, or he will just not necessarily let it choose for him, but on the sidebar where it says, here are 20 things that are a bit similar, he picks number 5 or number 10 or scrolls down so he's off the screen. But he likes things and he finds things. Now, they're not all new things, or rather they're not all new songs. Something he showed me an amateur Polish big band playing a song called Apoloma, which is a beautiful song, and it was rather nicely done. I have to say this, I'm not sure the rest of their oeuvre was nearly so well done as we explored it, but that song was done sort of to perfection. And there was this odd ambience to the recording because it was filmed live in an auditorium that actually gave it a kind of deeper sound. But that's just one particular recording, and he loved that so much. The next time I went to visit, he sat me down and said, look what I've found. And he was absolutely right. It was spiffing. It was top-notch stuff. So he tells me of things that he's found, and he seems to be working his way through Scandinavian jazz groups at the moment.
As one does, yes.
Oh, incidentally, I just want to throw out the name here. The great Russell Davies, one of the great radio presenters of our kind of music.
It was Doctor Who.
No, Russell T. Davies is the writer. Russell Davies is a great radio man. Introduced those of us who used to listen to his radio program to the best kind of music to come out of Scandinavia. And I'm sorry if you like ABBA. It's not ABBA. It was a group called the Swedanes, little sort of jazz group from the 1950s, made up of Swedish people and Danish people, the Swedanes. Look them up. They're great. Although one of their singers went on to become a truly amazing Scandinavian jazz singer.
Okay.
And I knew that without my father having found her independently. There we are. And I do the same thing. I do occasionally have an evening where I just think, I'm going to follow my nose on YouTube and see where it takes me. And you find things, sometimes covers, sometimes new music, sometimes new shows that you've not come across, sometimes old shows you've simply not come across, or very obscure musical films. I find wonderful things, as I know everyone who does it must do, and I'm sure you do too. And delightfully, sometimes old things. And I'll sort of finish this story, if you like, because I have been rambling away. We've been talking about old technology moving on to the next form of technology and then becoming outdated and moving on to the next form again. And yet, somehow they've all got their aficionados. As you said, vinyls, people still love it. People are loving cassettes again, oddly, although the hiss there, it wouldn't bring me back. I'd stay with the CDs. I'm rediscovering CDs and really enjoying them. I wouldn't give up digital. It's not a choice of either or. It's both. But
they're both digital CDs and...
Well, of course they are, actually, yes. I mean, and I use my finger to turn them on. So, but...
Then you get a spark up your motherboard.
You want to avoid an electrical spark up your motherboard, I can assure you. Not to be recommended. But here we are. We're talking about using the latest technologies to find older music and then finding music that you still love on those older artifacts. One of the most recent songs I've discovered, or rather a version of the song I particularly like, there's a song called The Varsity Drag. And I knew it when I was a young man in the 80s because it was covered by a COD 1920s group called the Pasadena Roof Orchestra, who were terribly good and did all those 20 songs, but of course recording them at the time in hi-fi, so without the crackle. And I particularly liked The Varsity Drag.
The school, is it? The
Varsity, yeah, it just represents the universities.
Yes.
The Varsity Drag, and the drag was a kind of modern dance in the 1920s. There was a terrible film in the 1950s, a colour MGM musical. I think it was called Good News. Can't remember. And they did that thing that films sometimes did in the 50s when they were remaking things from the 20s, which was slow everything down, make it semi-serious, because it was a remake of a film that was lost. And The Varsity Drag is included in it. And if you watch The Varsity Drag in the colour MGM film version, it's very professional. But it's got about a quarter of the pace the song ought to have because it's a peppy 1920s number, which has been made speech marks a dance piece by slowing it down, and therefore is a yawnorama on YouTube.
That was the format it was in, I think.
Yawnorama, yes. Whereas on YouTube, I have found some clips from The Missing Film. The Missing Film partially exists. It's not completely missing, but
I thought it was on YouTube. You can press the button to speed it up, so it kind of.
Oh, can you?
Yes.
Oh, can you? All right. Well, might be, give everyone a sort of squeaky voice. So
Yes.
Very Pinky and Perky or Alvin and the Chipmunks. But if you go back far enough, you can find the original 1920s musical with the Varsity Drag in it. And first of all, it's amazing. Because first of all, they don't care. Because everyone, it was cheap to get actors and dancers, so it was about 40 people on this soundstage. It's sound stage. It's set in a classroom in a university, and instead of learning Latin and Greek, one of the lyrics, they're doing the Varsity Drag, the latest dance. But because it's a 1920s, therefore early musical film, they've got animation. 3 Romans who are on the blackboard come to life and dance. The lead singer briefly sings it in Pig Latin. It's really beautifully done. It's peppy, and you can see why the song's a great hit. And so to finish this discussion, we've been talking about modern and old artifacts, formats, and indeed material. I've used the latest material, digital, to go back and find 20s music from musicals, or in this case, a musical film, which is superb.
And it's nice that it took a digital breakdown for you to look into your real physical media.
I mean, musical locker.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, it was enough to loft the spirits.
Very good. Very good. Very good. Yes, well, thank you, Thos. It'd be interesting to look into YouTube more and kind of talk about the vast treasure trove that is that when it comes to shows and archive recordings and legal things and stuff like that.
I'd be delighted to talk about YouTube. I mean, I find it the most easy to access source of speech marks new, and by which I mean unknown to me, music. Yeah. And the very fact that I can do that and my 85-year-old father is doing it, and I have no doubt that 25...
You should get your father on the podcast as well, talking about what he's listening to.
I'm not sure he'd want to, but I can certainly report back that he has been.
Well, Thos, thank you. Thank you very much for discussing that.
And am I right that I can, to take home, you're going to give me a cassette of this conversation?
Yes, I'm recording it right now on my reel-to-reel player that I spent thousands of pounds on.
Yeah. Oh no, I've rubbed my magnet up against it.
You get to spark up your motherboard again, Thos. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Musical Talk. We shall speak to you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Musical Talk. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk, you can visit our website at musicaltalk.co.uk, where you'll find all our episodes, or you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Musical Talk.